All right, shippers, welcome to Headline Mastery. This is a course completely dedicated to writing headlines. Headlines are the most important part of your writing. It doesn't matter if you're writing an atomic essay, a Twitter thread, an article on Medium, a Quora answer, or if you're writing a book, or if you're writing a course, if you're writing a landing page, if you're writing an email campaign. Your headline is basically the thing that tells the reader, this is what you're about to get. And a lot of times, I remember when I was first starting to write online, I thought about headlines as the thing you did at the end. You wrote, you said everything that you wanted to say, and then you put a bow on top of it. The headline was just, I just need to give it a title and then I'm done. And it took me a really long time to realize that it's actually the opposite. The headline is your North Star. Your headline is where you're going. It's clarity for yourself. This is exactly what I'm writing about. It's clarity around what the reader gets in exchange. Something that we don't talk about enough in the world of writing and publishing and attention is people pay for your content with their time. Even if it's a paid product and they're paying for your book or they're paying for your course or whatever with money, they're also paying with their time. It's seconds, minutes, hours of their life. So everything that you write, the headline is basically telling the reader, look, if you give me 30 seconds of your life, here's what you're going to get in exchange. This is what you're going to learn. This is the story you're going to get told. This is the thing that you're going to walk away with, whether it's a feeling, whether it's an insight, whether it's a just interesting, fun party fact, whatever it is, that's the thing that the reader's really asking themselves. They're going, okay, if I consume this for 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 30 minutes, however long it takes to read it, the cost is the time, right? So the reader has to know, what do I get in exchange? Otherwise, I don't want to just be giving out 30 seconds of my life here and 3 minutes of my life there. And so what gives them the information to make that decision is your headline. Your headline is basically your proposal to them saying, look, this is what I'm going to give you. In exchange, you're going to give me your attention, your time, and hopefully the value that you receive from what you read is worth the time that you gave me. And that's the trade-off, right? That's ultimately the goal. So in order for your writing to be effective, it's really not just the writing itself. It's also how are you presenting the writing and how are you introducing readers to your writing. And the only way that a reader can make that decision is if they know this is what I'm getting, right? This is what you're promising. I'm giving you time. That's the exchange, okay? So that's what we're going to dig into here. This entire course is all dedicated to how do you write effective headlines? What does it mean to write an effective headline? What are the pieces of an effective headline? How can you make a headline cater more to wider audiences, more general audience? How do you make headlines cater to niche audiences? How can you be more and more specific? And all sorts of different things that basically reveal writing headlines as a whole art in itself. And if you can get really good at writing headlines, your clarity in what you write is going to go up 10x, 100x, because the headline is, like I said, it's the North Star. So if you don't have the direction, if you don't have clarity around where you're going with the headline, your content's not going to have that clarity. And so that's one of the big things we're going to talk about too, is why I believe you should write your headline first. I don't think you should write it last. We'll talk about that in a second. But basically, what makes a good headline? That's really the first question that everyone asks is, okay, how do I know if my headline's being effective or not? Well, there's a couple really helpful rules to live by. One is this thing we talk about all the time in Ship 30. I write about it constantly. It's this dilemma between, are you being clear or are you trying to be clever? And like I said, if you kind of subscribe to this belief that you write first and then you put a bow on top at the end, you do your headline last, more often than not, what happens is you feel like you already put all the content into the content, right? Like the value is in the 800 words that you wrote, or it's in the 300 words in your atomic essay, or it's in the, each individual tweet, and you have 10 tweets in a Twitter thread. You think that's where all the value is. And so as a result, what happens is you go, yeah, all the value's in there. I just now need to put a bow on top. So I'm going to come up with something clever because I already said everything, right? Because that's how you wrote it. You approach the content first, and then you're doing the headline last. The problem is that all operates with an assumption. And that assumption is that the reader knows all the things that you just took the time to write. And that's not the case. You took the time to write it, so you know what's in it, but the reader doesn't know what's in it. And so when the reader comes across your clever title, they're not going to know, oh, this is what it's really about, right? You're making that decision because you know that, but the reader doesn't know that. So really what makes a great headline out the gate, rule number one, is the headline has to be clear. The headline is more effective when it tells the reader explicitly what they're going to get. The less clear the headline is, the less effective it is. And you can really push this boundary. I mean, you can take this to the nth degree. And one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about is how to get more and more specific in the words that you choose when writing your headline, because the words are what tell the reader, this is what direction we're going to think in. This is the direction that we're headed. This is what you're going to get out of it. This is who it's for. This is what it's about. And each individual word that you pick is going to drive home that clarity for the reader. And if you don't do that, right, there's kind of this chain of command that happens. And how it goes is like this. If the reader's scrolling and they come across your headline and they don't immediately understand what it's about, who it's for, what you're promising, why they should read it, if it's not clear, then they're confused. And that level of confusion can be on a spectrum. You know, if you're going for a really clever headline and you're not being clear at all, which I'll show you some examples of, you're going to be really confused as a reader, right? What is this about? Why should I read this? And, you know, on the other side of the spectrum, if you just are a little lazy with the words that you pick, or you just kind of pick general words, you're not being that specific, the reader might kind of get it. So they're only a little confused, but there's still a little confusion. And the rule of thumb is if the reader is confused, the reader is gone. It's just a natural impulse. It's the way that we consume information on the internet. Next time you're scrolling through your social media feed, realize how you make decisions around what you click on and what you don't. And you'll notice this pattern. Anytime something's even a little bit confusing to you, you're like, it's not worth it. It's not worth sitting here trying to figure out what the person's trying to tell me. So you scroll right past. Okay. So rule number one is if it's not clear, it's not a great headline. Period. Doesn't matter how clever it is. Doesn't matter how funny you think your pun is. Doesn't matter how witty you think your wordplay is. It has to be clear. Number two is the headline has to make a promise. And we're going to get into tons of examples of this because this is kind of the big obstacle that I find a lot of writers struggle with is they go, I'm writing a headline about what it is. And then they just stop there. And really what makes a great headline is kind of like what makes a great movie trailer. You know, it can't just be, hey, this movie's about X, you know, or this essay that I wrote is about X. You also have to tell the reader, and here's what you're going to get out of it. Here's the feeling that you're going to end up with. Here's the thing you're going to learn. Here's the story that you're going to remember. Here's the way that your life is going to be different after reading it. And if you don't hint at a promise, the headline is weaker. And this is that gap between headlines that are good and headlines that are great. You know, headlines that are great make promises. Headlines that are good are just kind of like, yeah, it's clear. I said what it is. Okay, it's fine. And you can get by with that. But if you really want to push it, you got to make a big promise to the reader. The third is the language that you choose, specificity. So what specificity means is whatever it is you're writing about, who it is you're writing for, how you want the reader to feel, what the promise is. If any of those things are vague, if they settle for a term or a word that is like, yeah, this could kind of be applied to a bunch of different people, you're basically reducing the potency of the language. And so there's this growth that happens when you start to realize that each individual word in the headline is an opportunity to be more and more specific, right? It's not just for people, it's for writers. And it's not just for writers, it's for digital writers, right? Each time we're making it more and more specific, it becomes more and more clear who this is for. And you can do this with what you're writing about. You can do this with who it's for. You can do this with the feeling that you want the reader to have. You can do this with the promise that you're making. So we're going to go through tons of examples of how to make the subject more and more specific and how to use language in a way that is more and more specific so that the reader sits there and doesn't go, I kind of get it. Maybe this is for me, maybe it's not for me. And instead you create a very binary feeling. Oh, this is absolutely for me versus this is absolutely not for me. That's actually what you want. You don't want anyone can read this. You want this is absolutely for me, this absolutely is not for me. So that's number 3. Number 4 is, I kind of just hinted at this, is this whole idea of making something for one person as opposed to trying to make something for everyone. When you try and make something for everyone, what happens is you end up creating something for no one, because there's no such thing as appealing to everyone, right? You can open the aperture, you can make categories bigger and bigger, you can aim for more general audiences, but at some point you have to draw a line in the sand and go, this is who it's for, and more importantly, this is who it's not for. If you don't do that, the reader, same with all these other rules that we're kind of outlining, the reader sits there and goes, I don't really know if this is worth my time, because it sounds like you're on the fence. So, what am I going to get out of this? I'm just basically going to learn that there's two sides to this. Like, that's not really interesting to me. There's a reason why all the, most popular, most read, most shared opinion content on the internet, it all takes a side. And that doesn't mean that you need, we're not talking about a political side, or we're not talking about anything controversial. It just means being very clear about this is who it's for, and this is who it's not for. So for example, if I'm writing about online writing advice, the simple fact that I'm saying this is online digital writing advice is me kind of drawing a line in the sand going, if you're not interested in writing on the internet, if you just still want to live in the good old days of writing by hand, on paper, by candlelight, in your journal, maybe wearing a chapeau while you do it, this isn't going to be for you. And I want that, right? I want that distinction, because if I don't, then I'm going to end up getting a bunch of people that take one step into the content and go, this actually isn't really for me. I'm not really interested in this. What do? Then they leave. So you're way better off optimizing all of your content for, I really want to be specific about who I'm going after, and I want to take a stance that attracts that type of person. And the more specific you can get on the stance that you're taking, the more you can draw a line in the sand, the more likely you are to attract the readers you do want and actually repel the readers that you don't want. And that's a good thing. A lot of writers think that's a bad thing. That's like best case scenario. That is what you want. And then 5th, we're going to talk about this called the curiosity gap. So the curiosity gap is in your headline, you're teasing the ending without revealing the answer. A great example I love using is, if you watch a movie trailer or you listen to a podcast trailer or something, right? They hint at, there's these 3 people in a small town, and 2 of them have known each other forever, and 1 of them is new in town. And by the end of the season, 1 of them is dead, and you don't know which one did it, right? It's teasing the ending. And so you're like, okay, I know I'm starting here, and by the end of this thing, somebody's dead. I don't know who's dead. I don't know who did it. I don't know how it went down. And so I'm going to listen to find out, right? You're going to listen to go on the journey and to fill in the middle. That's what a great headline does. And it doesn't have to be a story, right? This happens with insights and actionable frameworks and whatever it is that you're talking about. The headline basically just says, look, here's what we're going to talk about. And at the end, the promise, this is what you're going to get out of it. Now click to fill in the middle. Click to read and go on the journey and learn and go from A to C. That's really what the headline's supposed to do. if you don't do that, right? If you don't create that sort of carrot, that journey for the reader's either going to go, you gave me the answer in the headline, so I guess I don't need to read the article. Or they're going to go, this isn't interesting to me. This doesn't make me feel like I'm going to go on a journey. And that's what you want. You want to instill that feeling, right? You want to trigger the reader to go, oh, I want the carrot. I want to know what happens at the end. So let me click to read and fill in the middle. So there are all these rules of what makes a really effective headline. And we're going to go through tons of examples to show you how to take headlines, tweak them, how to swap words in and out. We'll go through examples. But this is really the big POV of how do you write effective headlines. And like I said, this applies to atomic essays, Twitter threads, right? The first tweet that you see is basically a headline. That's what gets you to click and read the thread. This works for YouTube video titles. This works for email course subject lines. This works for landing pages. This works for products. Writing headlines is a universal thing. And if you can't write effective headlines, you are not going to be able to hook a reader's attention and get them into the piece, into the content. And if you're sitting there going, yeah, but my content is so good. My content's so good. I bet, I don't even need to do anything special with the headline. I just need to put a couple words there, tie a bow on top. And then once they get into the content, they're going to love it. And the whole problem with that is it's operating with the assumption that the reader is even going to make it that far. You are assuming the reader is just, without question, going to give you 3 minutes of their life. You're just assuming they're going to open their pockets for you. And that's not what happens, right? The reader's going shopping with their time. So before they spend any money with you, before they spend any time with you, they're going to read the headline and they're going to ask themselves, is this worth it? So in order for them to feel like it's worth it, they need to know, what is this about? Who is this for? And what do I get in exchange? Okay. So again, just real quick as a recap, why should you write your headline first? This is why. It took me 4 years to write my first book. It took me 4 months to write my second book. And the reason, I feel like, has a lot to do with this. This is the difference between a writer that writes to endlessly explore, and then it's through the writing and through hours of rewriting and then rewriting some more and then rewriting some more, that then somewhere along the way, they finally come to the decision, oh, now I know what this is about. And sometimes you need to go on that journey for a bit. Sometimes you don't know and you need to explore. But more times than not, I've found that this is really a headline exercise. This is you sitting there basically trying to decide, what direction do I want to go? And so as a result, you see on the right, you're just writing. You're just going in circles. You're just spinning your wheels. You've done 27 rewrites. The number of times that I rewrote the first chapter of my first book, probably more than 100. And I'm not exaggerating. I have a folder on my laptop with 100 plus rewrites of just the first chapter. The reason was because I didn't know what it was really about. I hadn't yet learned enough to understand, even if I don't name the chapter that, right? Even if I just write a headline for myself to give me direction, I didn't know that that was going to help me create the path forward. And so instead I would just write and write and write. And then at the very end, I thought, oh, okay, well, this I think is kind of it. Let me just put a headline on it. Let me just put a title on it. And it took me years to figure out it's actually the headline you want to write first, because the headline is what decides, are we going east or are we going west? Are we going north or are we going south? Are we going to New York or are we going to LA? It gives you the direction. And so part of this course, and one of the things that I really want to pass along to you, is this thinking. If you're the type of person that just wants to dive into the writing and explore, and then just throw a headline on at the very end, I actually feel like if you can adopt this mentality, your writing is going to get clearer. You're going to write 10 times faster because it's a lot easier and you have a lot less rewriting to do if you start with a headline. Your writing's going to resonate with more readers because you're going to really understand, before you even get into the writing, what resonates. What's the promise you're making? Are you delivering on that promise? And it's a completely different way of thinking about it. So now in my own writing process, I spend way more time on the headline than anything else. I write the headline first. I always write the headline first. Sometimes while I'm doing the content, if I stumble upon something, I might go back and tweak the headline a little bit. But the headline is the compass, it's the direction. And I never anymore do the whole, I'm just going to write and explore, and then throw a headline on top of it. And I found this to be incredibly helpful in my own writing process. So that's what I hope to pass along to you. We're going to go through tons of examples. This is super, super in-depth, all exclusively about headlines. So welcome to Headline Mastery. I hope this is helpful, and let's dive in.